Chapter 4. The Handsome One. Tuesday, June 23rd. Skyscrapers, normally different colors in the sun-baked Bay Area, were now damp and painted almost jet black after half a day's rain. Towering, seemingly endless, lost in low floating dark gray-hearted clouds, the skyscrapers' lights and eerie orange glow flickered through the thinner outer edges of the passing rolling fog. Over the past month of living in Seattle, I had gotten used to the city's white noise, a background rainforest of never-ending honking, tires driving through water puddles, airplanes gliding on jet streams and emergency sirens reflecting off thick double-paned windows. I had almost 2 hours in between my two jobs. I'd drive to the old Seattle Oceanside Public Library, where I'd sit in the metal high-rise bank high-rises plaza, having coffee and lunch. From people watching to reading, I noticed that the evergreen-surrounded plaza wasn't as busy as the rest of the city, or so it seemed. The meta high-rise bank to my right rose almost 15 stories into the sky and would too get lost on the cloud-covered days. I made myself comfortable and at home sitting on the 3-foot stone wall of a flower bed with 5 birch trees and grass. I sat almost 40 feet west, just in front of the library's main glass entrance. I slowly lifted my eyes to where a small group of 5 people had gathered. Arms intertwined, they posed for a group photo, smiling as if they were having the time of their lives. My gaze stopped on the guy in the middle. Wearing a baseball cap and a plaid shirt, he stood tall, handsome. I smiled softly to myself and wondered what it would feel like to stand there next to someone like that, next to him. Breaking apart a few seconds later, they lingered only for a few moments. Quickly looking down at the book on my lap, I found some random spot and read the same word over and over again till I felt like they had left. Letting time go by with nothing to slow it down, I formed a routine and tried to make my actions as balanced as possible. Yet I still felt that at any moment, the ground I was standing on could crumble. This led me to frantically look for something stable to hold on to, something I knew would be a constant, something I could turn to or run to if I ever felt like things were falling apart. Often, as the months passed, I would see Jen in my mind's eye, next to me, always the same smile. 1 year later. Monday, June 6, 2016. 11:18 a.m. With a quick glance at my phone, I estimated how much time it would take me to find a parking spot, drop my things off at my office and walk to the flower bed. With a book and coffee in hand, it was almost 11:20 by the time I jumped out of my dark blue SUV. Seeing a wet paint sign on the building's back door, I took a deep breath and turned around. Pulling my hoodie on, I put in my headphones and made my way to the front of the building, dodging in and out of the paths of people walking in every direction. I sat down and pushed away their anxiety. Staring for a moment at a strip of 10 evergreens all in a row several yards in front of me, I tried to ignore the wandering eyes of the remaining people who cleared out for lunch. Glancing up quickly at the clouds moving slow, I hoped they would break apart soon. I kept reading. In a numb state from focusing, a slight tap on my right shoulder needed to be felt twice before I glanced up. Excuse me, do you happen to have a napkin by chance? A man asked, pointing at the spilled coffee on his chest. Yeah, I replied, quickly reaching into my bag and handing him what I had left. He wore dark gray slacks with a brown belt. Handsomely tall, he wore a thin black jacket that covered a tucked-in light blue polo he had on. Well-toned but not overly built, the colors complemented his sharp Caucasian complexion. Frantically trying to clean his shirt, he sat down on my right. Tentative. I pulled out my earbuds and looked over at him. Curious. It kind of sucks that I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he finally said, meeting my eyes and pausing for a moment. Glancing down at the hoodie I had involuntarily put on, I pulled it off and handed it to him. "Here," I said, "I only wear it in case it rains. It might fit you." Looking over at me with light earth brown eyes, he shook his head. "I can't take that." "Not your color?" I smiled, lowering it a little. Slowly grabbing it, he pulled off his jacket and slipped the hoodie on. "Not too bad," he said, looking down at it, "and it kind of blends well, nothing flashy. Not that you're boring." He quickly backtracked. "I get what you mean," I smiled. "I'm not really into graphic designs on clothing, unless it's something simple or that I can really relate with." "Yeah," he replied, looking at the almost empty plaza, then back to me. Dropping my eyes from his, he held out his hand. "I'm Derek Stangler. Forrest Clemens," I said, shaking it. "That's Forrest with just one R. I forgot I had taken off the lid to let it cool down," he said, standing up. About 4 inches taller than me, I guessed him to be around 6'3". I smiled up at him. "I did the same thing last month. Luckily, I was at home, and alone. I guess we have the same luck with coffee," he said, taking a step back. "I work there as an accountant." He pointed to the metal high-rise bank to his right. "I get off at 5. Will you be around so I can return it?" he asked, pulling at the hoodie's right shoulder. "I get off at 5 here too," I said, nodding to my right. "You can just meet me right here." "Sounds like a plan." Derek smiled, taking several steps back. "It was nice meeting you." "You too," I said after him. "Oh wait, here," he said, handing me his jacket, the skin under his eyes glowing red. Confused, I looked up. "It's collateral, now I have to come back." He smiled a perfect smile. "See you around 5, Forrest with one R." 4:55 p.m. Broken apart low floating clouds passed overhead as I made my way down the stairs and past the library's 2 glass entrances. I wove through the passing people after getting off work and sat down at the stone flower bed and looked around quietly. Flipping to my birch tree leaf bookmark, I skimmed the 10 pages for my spot and picked up where I had left off before running into Derek. Unable to get his short brown hair and smile out of my head all afternoon, my heart pounded as I waited for him to walk up next to me. Something about him felt familiar, or maybe it was just his stature. Nevertheless, I put my hands in my pockets hoping to calm my erratic heart beating, mind racing, hands shaking anxiety. No one suspected a thing. Derek's voice broke from my right. Looking up, I smiled. "It smells nice, by the way. I also found some pine cones and autumn leaves in your pockets. I wore it while out hiking last weekend. It probably smells like pine bark and rain," I said, blushing. "That's what that is?" he asked, sitting next to me with my hoodie folded under his hands. I wish I had more time to do things like that. Work's got me tied down. It would be nice to take a breath every now and then. "I was going to go on a walk by the harbor," I said, standing up. "If you have time?" "I'm a little tired," he answered, dropping his shoulders and handing me my hoodie. "Maybe sometime next week we could. You know where to find me," I said, handing him his jacket back. "Have a good rest of your day." Feeling a little let down, I shook it off and stuck to my plan. I walked to my car and threw my backpack and hoodie into the back seat, turned around only to see Derek walking up a few feet away. "I was going to call after you." He smiled, his hands in his jacket pockets. "But I thought I'd just catch up to you instead. I didn't want to disrespect you." "Change your mind?" I asked, pulling at my right ear. Walking next to me, he felt anxious, as if he were holding his breath with one lung and breathing with the other. "Well, I just remembered that I'm an overworked middle-class American. I'm always exhausted. This small change could be good for me," he said, smiling at me as we passed the flower bed. Walking to the left of him, I looked up occasionally as we walked several blocks down to the harbor and took a right. He said he'd also grown up in a small town in the Midwest. He had 3 brothers, all older than him. Mitch was 34, Eric and Tom were twins, age 30, and Derek, 28. Born in Rockford, Illinois, he talked about moving all over the state. After his mom and dad had separated, he'd moved with his mom to Belvedere in high school. After I finished my master's, I moved with my mom for 6 months. Then once I got a job here, I up and left. It was kind of nerve-wracking, moving so far away from my family, but I knew it's what I wanted. My career is very important to me. What about you? He asked, glancing down over at me. Did it scare you too, to just up and leave like that? Yes and no. I'm stubborn in a way that if I find something I like, I tend to stick with it for a long time, overlooking the fact that things change. I lived in the same town my whole life, so when it was time to leave, I realized it was for the best. Seeing Heidi's eyes flash into mine, I lowered my head as we walked up to a stoplight. Pressing the button and stepping back, my heart sank as I thought of Jason, who I found out 8 months ago had died from his injuries. Feeling guilt, I often wondered if my spoiled, rotting resentment towards his actions had hunted him down and destroyed him. But even that didn't feel right. I never wanted him dead. I never wanted Aaron dead, or Matt or Brandon. Stepping closer, Derek smiled over at me. How do you like it here now? Met a lot of people? Only the people from work. I shrugged. I'm more of an introvert. I like to keep to myself unless I connect with someone. After waiting at the stoplight for an abnormal amount of time, Derek finally shook his head and glanced around at the line of stopped cars, also honking in confusion. Looking at me, he nodded at me to follow him across the street. Flickering on and off, the stoplights eventually went out altogether as we got to the other side. That was weird, he said, looking behind us. They were working when we walked up. Finding a small diner, we sat and talked, forgetting about the time. A soft thunder just off over the bay reminded us to look outside at the setting sun's golden-orange sky. 8:34 p.m. Exhausted, I took a deep breath, unlocked my apartment door, hung up my keys, and was finally able to drop on my bed face down. I called Jen. Turning my head to the right, I put the phone on speaker. Laying there for almost 30 minutes, I told her about running into Derek, traffic, about meeting with our lawyer this last Friday the 3rd, and finally about how things were going with getting in my application for starting my master's. Tuesday, June 7th. Waking up late, I frantically jumped into the shower, ran water over my face, threw a dark green plaid on over the gray shirt I wore yesterday, and hurried to the elevator, forgetting my wallet, my laptop charger, and God knows what else. I half tore open the door to Mr. Barton's class. Walking down the stairs, I whispered to him as the last of the students filed in. "I'm sorry I'm late. Did you post the notes and printouts for next week's trip?" He whispered back. "Yes," I said, taking a seat off to the right as he started in on his lecture. Pulling out my laptop and glasses, I typed the day's notes up. I glanced around every now and then. A small prick of anxiety burned in my mind. I wondered if the students were judging me. I often questioned how they saw me. Looking over at Mr. Barton. He was in his 50s. He had short gray hair with no beard and was as tall as me. Working for him and with him wasn't so bad. He was a nice guy who loved his job, which made me love mine that much more. Ending at exactly 45 after, I waved goodbye to him as he finished talking to several students and walked out. Pulling on my jacket and backpack, I walked up the row where a man who looked like he was in his mid-30s was sitting. I'd never seen him in class before, so I thought I'd question him. "I have to say, I don't remember seeing your name on the roster. What is it again? It's strictly need to know. He stood up. He wore a dark suit and tie and was considerably taller than me. I'm Forrest, I said, holding out my hand. Leaving it empty, I lowered it. Mr. Barton is already gone for the day. If you want to set up a meeting with him, you'll have to catch him before his class starts. Not here for him, he replied, looking around the empty class. Nodding my head, I took several more steps back. Look, I don't know you and I'm not trying to be rude, but I have to go. I work for OPCO, a recruiter for Mr. Yates, Mr. Dobrik and for Mr. Hanif. Raising my eyebrows sarcastically, I stopped in place. OPCO? What? Let me guess, you guys package cat food? I asked, smiling to myself. It's a collection of businesses, he said, clearing his throat. Here in the Washington area, we have a position we think you'd be good for. I've heard that before. I'm not looking for a new job, thanks. Turning to leave, I grabbed tight to my bag straps. You work part-time here, he stated. Not saying anything, I stopped and slowly turned around. How'd you know that? I just assume, he said, putting his hands in his pockets. The position we're looking to fill pays very well and you only work 6 hours a week. You'll make $2,400 every 2. Getting to the door, I shook my head and turned around. I'm not looking for money. OPCO has a variety of things, Forrest, he said, finally meeting my eyes. Feeling the smile fall from my face, I tightened my jaw. If you're looking to travel, they could send you out around the world as a consultant. I think I'll be okay, I said, making sure that my voice had no emotion to it. Well, if you change your mind, here's my card, he said, pulling out a small white piece of paper and slipping it into my pocket as he walked past me. 11:15 a.m. I pushed my hair down and tried to fix the wrinkles in my shirt, hoping Derek wouldn't notice. A light rain fell that morning, so I put on my hood and made my way from my office to meet him for lunch. You're here early. Derek's voice rang from my right. So are you, I said, looking at my phone. Every day from 11:30 till I have to go to work, I sit here and read, having lunch. It's the perfect spot. Are you sure you're okay with eating out here? Derek asked, standing in front of me and looking around. It did just rain, we could go to my office. A little rain never hurt anyone, I said, looking up at him. Pulling off his jacket and using it as a seat. Resting his hands on his gray slacks. I could hear him trying to control his breathing. Anyway, I think it's done. How was the rest of your day yesterday? I asked, unzipping my lunch bag and pulling out a sandwich wrapped in plastic. It was a good day, he said, smiling and pulling out his food too. I have to say, I'm happy I ran into you. I mean, I've made a few friends, but none I connect with. My life and time mainly revolves around my career. Same. I mean, I've only been here for a year. Most of my time's been spent trying to form a routine and deal with traffic and work. I looked at Derek and squinted as a ray of sunlight broke free from the clouds and passed over us. We finished our food. I turned to face him and pushed my hood back. Have you ever heard of OPCO? Your hair, Forrest, Derek said, throwing his head back in a laugh, before it turned into him looking down laughing to himself. I was running late, I said, trying to push it down. I didn't have time to fix it. Here, he said, leaning over and combing his fingers through my hair. Trying to push down the strands that were out of control, he kept talking. Yeah, I've heard of it. It's the name of one of the main electrical companies here. I mean, it's kind of a lot of businesses rolled into one, but that's the main thing they deal with, utilities. Who's it run by? I questioned, feeling his fingers. I only know this because one of my coworkers mentioned it. If I remember, it's 3 guys who share it. They each have branches they're in charge of. Yeah, I was just wondering. There's no hope, Derek said, sitting back. Looks like you're going to have to wear a baseball cap for the rest of your life, or just shave it all off. What would you do? Neither. That was bad advice, he said, a smile crossing his face as he looked down again. A little water and desperation should be fine, I said, standing up and putting my hood back on. I'll be back. Do you have a restroom in your building's lobby? We do, he said, standing. Let me walk you to the door. 12 p.m. 45 minutes of small talk. Derek finally glanced at his watch. Slowly he packed his lunch, closed the book he was reading, and turned to face me. You wear a lot of earthy colored plaids, he said, pulling at my right sleeve. Letting my eyes find him before I turned my head in his direction, I half smiled. Yeah, I like the colors. They're calming. Oh, hey, I was going to ask, what are you doing this Friday the 10th after work? Ah, that's a good question, Derek said, looking up to his right, trying to remember. Lowering his shoulders, he turned to me. My friend Beth wanted to take some friends and I up into the mountains for the weekend. Should be fun. What about you? I was going to ask if you wanted to see a movie. I blushed, itching my right eyebrow. Or go to get a drink. We could go next Wednesday, Derek said, now standing up to face me. And it'll just be you and I. Not saying anything, I nodded okay and pulled a book from my bag. I'll see you tomorrow? He asked, walking slowly backward, trying to catch my eyes. Yeah, I said, raising my hand. I'll see you. Wednesday, June 8th. 11:10 a.m. Remembering that I hadn't asked Derek about lunch that morning, I moved over to the library's second-floor eastmost window and looked out over the plaza. Grabbing my jacket, I hurried out to the outline of a person sitting alone at the flower bed, in tan khakis and a blue polo shirt that was tucked in by his leather brown belt. Derek sat looking over some papers. Slow. Unsure. I walked up to the flower bed in silence, counting every step it took me to get there. Excited. As if the cluster of butterflies in my chest had just found a patch of flowers. My heart pounded in my chest. Stopping a few feet away from his right, I spoke out. When am I going to be able to see your office? Well, I was hyping it up so much the other day, now I'm kind of wishing it were made of gold to impress you, he replied. Yeah? Gold and silver, I said, walking to his side, my hands in my jacket pockets. With diamonds as doorknobs. That would be impressive, Derek said finally, looking up at me with one eyebrow raised just slightly. And on the door, I'll have an S made from gold. What did you just say? I asked, frozen. That I would have a golden S. For Stangler. My last name. Well, mine's just a desk and a mini fridge with a half-eaten turkey sandwich. I smiled down at him. I'd rather have yours, he said. I don't know, I said, stuffing my hands in my pockets. A golden S sounds nice. Stealing a glance in every direction, Derek's eyes finally rested on me. Getting up, he nodded for me to follow him. Do I need any kind of special clearance? I questioned from his right. I am your special clearance, he said, holding the door and flashing a grin. We walked past the receptionist desk after I had signed in, Derek's right hand steering me by the waist to the elevator. Anxious. I half hoped he didn't feel obligated to show me around. We had joked about it, but I didn't want there to be any kind of pressure to actually do it. You should relax a little, I said, looking up over at him, feeling his hand fall away from me. Running his hands over his khakis and fixing his shirt, he glanced over at me. It's that bad that you can notice? Yeah, it's all over you. I put my hand up next to him as if his anxiousness were tangible, something I could run my fingers through. Getting out of the elevator, we walked past cubicles and to the corner of the 15th floor. Derek's office was considerably larger than mine. Scanning the space with curiosity, I slid my fingertips over his dark, heavy wooden desk. "You sure have a lot of sticky notes," I said, turning to him. "Yeah, I just want to make sure I don't forget anything," he said, taking off his jacket and putting it on the back of his chair. "Most of my days are pretty busy." His office, a corner room with tan walls, had no windows. Aside from the bookshelf on the opposite side of the door, the space was simple, with a Lord of the Rings poster here and a Jurassic Park poster there. I moved around slowly, feeling Derek's brown eyes follow my every wide-eyed step. I put my hands in my pockets and tried to relax, with both of us on edge, both of us unsure of how the other would react. It must drive you crazy," I finally said after Derek had sat down. "What?" Sitting just across from him, I rested my hands on his desk. "Not having a window." "Yeah, it does," he said, itching his right eyebrow. "I didn't know if you'd say anything about it." "Here, do you have any tape?" I asked, looking around. "Yeah," he said, handing me the roll. Watching me intently. Opening the book I had been carrying around, I flipped to my page marker and took out the single yellow dried birch tree leaf. Walking around his desk, I taped it next to the rest of his sticky notes and stood back. "What's that for?" he asked, looking up at me. "Think of it as a sticky note. A reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Anything you want it to be." I grinned. Amused, Derek stood up. "It's only going to remind me of you." A few weeks later. The summer storms that passed just above the city over the next few weeks brought nothing but rain. Moving from the flower bed to the window that overlooked the plaza on the library's second floor, I sat inside and read until I had to start my shift. Feeling overly uneasy, I found myself unable to sleep or concentrate. After several face-to-face meetings with our family's lawyer and filling out paperwork, the money Mom had left us was divided into 3 trust funds split between Greg, Jen and I. Unable to touch any of the funds until I was 25, I decided that it would be best if I just forgot about it altogether, until the time came when I could utilize it. Sunday, June 26th, 10:45 p.m. Calling Jen, Vanessa and Cody about every other day, I bounced the idea off them of dates Jen could come visit. Vanessa regretted going into her master's so soon. I told her how I was about to apply for a mortgage in the next few weeks. "Forrest, you're a bachelor living in a big city. I'd live it up a little, go on a few dates, get fucked, fall in love, fall out of love. We're so young and you're already trying to find a house with a white picket fence," she said Sunday night. "You know that's not me, right? If you're going to find love, you should take some chances," she said after an hour of talking about her new boyfriend. "It's not going to just fall into your lap. You're always so conservative. Let loose. Just look at me. I went to a party 3 months ago and now Mitch and I have been dating ever since." "Yeah, after you guys had sex. Look, hey, I'll call you back sometime this week. I have to get to bed," I said, turning off my nightstand light and pulling the blankets up around me. "Okay, love you. Good night," she said, hanging up. Monday, June 27th. From orange tile to blue stairs, I made my way to the basement of the library. After a full day of heavy rain, lightning and thunder that shook the glass of my office window, a severe weather warning over the intercom told everyone to seek shelter. Sitting down at a table, I quickly texted Kevin and asked if he was okay. I let my gaze wander as people flooded in from the top 2 floors. My eyes drifted over to Derek. Waving goodbye to his coworkers, he made his way to me. A hesitant smile crossed his face as I stood up and met him halfway. "Funny running into you here," I said, putting my phone in my jacket pocket. "Yeah, this storm's gotten pretty bad. he said, putting his hands in his pockets. Also, on our phones and computer screens, a warning flashed across telling us to get to a safe area. We would have gone to our basement, but I guess it's been under construction for the past few months. I'm not good with storms, I said, grabbing hold of my backpack straps and holding tight. We used to live in the Midwest. The storms there could get pretty bad. Forest, the storms there were tornadoes. This is just a bad lightning storm, nothing to be too scared of, Derek said, touching my shoulder. No, I get that, I said, giving him a weak smile. The lesser of two evils. It just puts me on edge, that's all. I just don't like lightning. Yeah, he said, me too. He rubbed the back of his neck. His anxiety started to creep off of him and climb up my skin. Don't go, I said as he turned away. I'm going to use the restroom. He smiled. Here, he said, handing me his white water bottle, blushing. Confused, I looked at him. It's collateral, now I have to come back. Walking over to me and gesturing for me to follow him as he walked out of the bathroom, he steered us away from the small crowd of people. Come stand with me over here. I hope this doesn't get too bad out, I said, walking next to him. I didn't park in the parking ramp. I hope my car is going to be okay. It's probably the worst storm of the summer and all you can think about is getting a parking ticket? Derek asked, looking at me confused. I parked under a tree, I said, taking off my backpack and pulling my plaid shirt tight around me as the lights flickered. Ah crap, I just remembered I did too, Derek gasped. I guess we have the same luck with parking under trees, he said, taking a step back from me. Hey, if I'm talking too much you should just say so because I'll keep going. No, it's okay, I said, shaking my head. It's distracting me from the storm. Okay, well, I'll keep going, Derek said, looking around. Have you talked to your family lately? My sister and cousin, I talked to them a few days ago. What about you? I talked to my mom last night, he said, playing with the water bottle in his hands. She's doing good. I guess my brothers are planning a trip to come see me. Should be fun. What's your lucky number? If you have one, I'd have to say 220. Not only do I see it most often, but it's the time I was born. What about you? Let's see, Derek thought for a moment. 115, also the time I was born. After the storm died down, Derek looked over at me. Making our way back up to the main floor behind everyone else, he walked slow. Hey, thanks for standing next to me, I said, feeling the butterflies in my chest resting on the firm, stable flowers he had planted. Happy I could help, he said, turning to face me. And hey, look, we survived. Walking backward as we reached the library's entrance, his hands in his pockets, he smiled at me as he left. Tuesday, June 28th. The cool wind. Soft. Ambient. It whispered from the rolling clouds that passed up over the city. Rubbing my eyes, I took a deep breath before opening the door to class. From the moment I had woken up, a migraine had made me want to stay in bed. Half tempted to text Mr. Barton about missing class today, I reluctantly got up. Class probably won't run that long, Forrest, Mr. Barton said as I walked over to him. I have a meeting with Mr. Yates in 30 minutes. Mr. Yates from OPCO? Yes, so if you could, type up the notes and post them to the class. Yeah. Do you mind if I tag along with you? I've always wondered what that place looked like. I could also take notes. It's not to the main plant, but to their building downtown. But yeah, it's just a quick interview about their environmental impact. It'll be good for you to sit in on. I don't know why I didn't think of that. Dropping my bag and pulling out my laptop, I quickly sat in the first row as the last of the students filed in. I constantly checked my watch and the clock on the wall, my bouncing knee becoming more anxious. I still wanted to know why they wanted to offer me a job without even knowing me. I mean, I was thankful for the offer, but I felt like I needed a few more answers if I could get any without having them ask questions about my personal life. Quickly grabbing my things after Mr. Barton dismissed the class, I followed him out to his car. The glass skyscraper, 20 stories high from what I could guess, was in the busiest part of the city, putting me a little on edge. I trailed behind Mr. Barton. We walked quickly through the glass doors and up to the receptionist, who smiled at us as we signed in and gave us directions to the elevator. I rubbed my temples and tried to distract myself from the pain by fixing my shirt almost compulsively. When we stopped at the 13th floor, I hung back for a second to collect my thoughts. "Forrest, are you okay?" Mr. Barton asked, looking back at me. "It's a little stuffy in here, that's all." I tried to shake off the feeling of what felt like fear. "Yeah, the elevation change can do that to a person. We only have 20 minutes with Mr. Yates, so it won't be long. We'll be out of here before you know it." Taking a seat, I anxiously played with my tan jacket strings. "I don't know why I'm so agitated," I thought, looking around. Standing up next to me after several moments, Mr. Barton held out his hand to a handsome, tall man in a very nice dark blue suit and red tie. I shook his hand and stepped back as Mr. Barton introduced himself. "And you?" Mr. Yates asked, raising his eyebrows at me. "Andrew." I asked Mr. Barton if I could sit in on the interview. "You know, take notes. If that's not okay, that's fine too." "Andrew?" Saying the first thing that came to mind, I felt uncomfortable giving him my real name. "Andrew Rogers." "Nice to meet you, Andrew," he nodded at me. "Same," I said as he directed us to his office. Mr. Barton slowly looking over at me. I refused to make eye contact with him. Knowing he would question me about it later, I sat in a chair just behind them, pulled out my glasses, pen and notepad and listened intently to their conversation. Talking about OPCO's environmental impact and contribution, I quickly wrote down as much as I could. "And what about you, Mr. Rogers? Do you have any questions?" Standing up and walking around his desk, I quickly put my notes away. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's almost been 20 minutes. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I help run a multi-billion-dollar company. If you want to ask me any questions, I suggest you ask them now, before it's too late," Mr. Yates said, stepping closer, his jawline sharp with every word. Trying to smile but too anxious to make it believable, I put my bag over my shoulder and stood up. "I'm okay, really. I just wanted to get the experience, but thank you. Your graduate student isn't really bright, Mr. Barton." Not breaking eye contact with Mr. Yates, Mr. Barton's face flashed red. "For Andrew, will you wait just outside the door?" "Oh, okay," I said, feeling my hands tremble as I grabbed the doorknob and quickly slipped out. Stepping out a few moments later, Mr. Barton's face now completely red, he stormed off down the hall. "Mr. Barton, what happened in there?" "I don't care if he's a part of a multi-billion-dollar business," Mr. Barton said, stopping and grabbing firm to my shoulder. "Treating people with respect is essential to building good relations." His comments were completely out of line. "You didn't have to do that," I said, shaking my head. "If I didn't, then who would?" "No one. The information they provide you, you use most in your classes. Don't let me put that relationship under stress just because some guy upset me." "So he did upset you?" "So what?" I said, dropping my shoulders. "So then I don't feel bad for telling him off and cutting ties." Mr. Barton turned to walk away. In silence, I walked behind him just a few feet. Everything about this place made me feel uneasy. It was very clean-cut. It all looked expensive and not like a place I could see myself working. Walking through the parking ramp, I slid into the car, buckled myself in and looked out the passenger window in silence. Breaking me away from my thoughts, Mr. Barton spoke. "Can I get you lunch?" "Ah, thanks, but can I take a rain check? My friend Derek and I are meeting at noon," I said, looking at my phone. "I'd better get you back then." He looked at his watch and put the car in reverse. "This Derek guy, is he a good guy?" "Yeah, I think so. He likes to travel a lot, tall, short brunette hair, has a subtle sense of humor that I like. He's very clean cut, but nothing too flashy." 11:59 p.m. Mr. Barton dropped me off across the street from the library. I quickly crossed the crosswalk and found Derek with a smile. I looked down at my hands. As I walked up to him, he stood up. "I thought you were going to be late," he said, taking out his earbuds and sitting back down. "Yeah, it's kind of been a long morning." I dropped my backpack and tilted my head. "Care to talk about it?" he asked. Rubbing my eyes, I pulled off my jacket and went over my morning in minor detail, trying not to make it out worse than it was. I took a deep breath and finally turned to Derek, who'd been silent the whole time. "I would have done the same thing," Derek said, a serious look on his face. "People have no right treating others like that. And I get it, you're just trying to be humble, but Forrest, don't let anyone treat you like that. Otherwise they'll think it's okay to do it to others." "How long have you and Mr. Barton worked together?" "I think he was the fourth application I applied for." "I don't remember." "For about a year now. The way you talk about him, he seems like a nice guy." "He is," I said, taking a deep breath and looking around. "He reminds me of my grandpa, always encouraging me to get out of my hometown and explore." "Was Seattle always the place you wanted to live?" "Well, yeah. My mom had just passed. My auntie didn't like us, so she kicked Jen and I out. We both finished up school. She moved away and so did the rest of my friends. I was going to move at the end of the summer and move in with Kevin, a roommate." I didn't know your mother passed, Forrest," Derek said, looking down at his hands and then back up to me with a stern look on his face. "I'm sorry. I don't think about it that much. I try not to, anyway." I hesitantly met his eyes, almost scared that he would look at me as if I were broken or somehow incomplete. I couldn't make eye contact with him for long, and for the most part, that was true. I had been so busy with both my jobs trying to get my feet on the ground, that aside from a single thought here and there, my mother next to never crossed my mind like she used to when I lived in North Dakota. What about your dad? What does he do?" "I think he lives in Fargo somewhere. After he walked out on my mom and left us alone, she never spoke of him again and I never saw him." Not meeting my eyes and in almost a whisper, he spoke. "I'm sorry to hear that. I was young. I didn't understand. I've lived most of my life without him. Sometimes I have flashbacks to him carrying me on his shoulders, how our family compared me to him. That I have his ears and hands. You'd think those days would be the best." Looking down at my fingertips, I cleared my throat. "But I think they're the worst. Is he still around?" Derek asked cautiously. "Yeah. Are you going to, make up with him?" "I'd like to think so," I answered. Feeling fragile, I wondered if Derek knew how vulnerable I felt opening up to him about my parents. To be honest, it hasn't crossed my mind. Maybe when things have settled down, I'll reach out. Falling silent for almost 5 minutes, I looked around in the cool air that pulled at his shirt and rustled my hair. Derek asked a question that caught me off guard. Have you ever kissed someone? Romantically?" "It was a long time ago," I answered, itching my right elbow. It meant nothing. Not saying anything right away, Derek looked around. "I haven't. To be honest, I haven't been looking." My eyes lowered. I played with the seams that ran down my jeans. Why? Why do you ask? Curiosity. I guess, he answered, shrugging. Refusing to make eye contact, he kept his gaze off of me. And all you did was kiss? Nodding softly yes, I looked down at my hands. Yeah, let's not talk about this anymore, Derek said, clearing his throat and glancing over at me. Smiling to himself, Derek stood up and put his hands in his pockets. Facing me. He took a deep breath. I was going to tell you, my brothers Eric and Tom are passing through town tonight. They would have come with our parents, but their work schedules are completely different. I was going to have dinner with them. You should come with me. Some of my other friends are coming too. I wouldn't want to intrude, I said, looking up at him. No, it's fine, he said, moving a little closer. They're all really cool at making people feel like they belong. You'll fit right in. I promise. I'll pick you up around 7 tonight. Cool, he asked, trying to catch my eyes. Okay. I smiled up at him. 6:49 p.m. Feeling a little odd about the whole thing as I waited for Derek, I sat on the wooden bench just outside my apartment and got lost in thought. I appreciated that he was making the effort to help me fit in, but I felt like I really couldn't give anything back in return. To be honest, I felt ashamed I had nothing to offer. He couldn't meet my parents, he couldn't meet Jen, Vanessa or Cody, and I only had work friends I hardly ever talked to, let alone hung out with. Coming out of the shadows wearing a baseball cap and a red plaid shirt over gray, Derek slid his hands into his pockets. Hey Forrest. Frozen in my tracks, he smiled at me. You look so familiar. I stood. I hope so. He smiled, his Adam's apple moving with a slight laugh. Getting to the bar a few minutes early, we walked over to a small group of people sitting in the corner where two men stood up and embraced Derek. Pulling out my seat for me, he smiled around the table. Tom, this is Forrest, he said, turning to me, and Forrest, this is my brother Eric. Nice to meet the both of you. I smiled and shook both of their hands. Don't be nervous, you'll be fine, I thought as I took a seat and looked at the menu. Don't be nervous, Derek said, leaning into me from my left. Who said I was nervous? I smiled. It's all over you, he said, holding up his hand near me as if my anxiety was something that could be physically felt. Just be yourself and they'll like you. I've told my brothers some things about you. Oh, and Forrest, I also have something else to tell you. Well, now I'm nervous, I said, meeting his eyes. It's nothing like that. It's about work. I got the position I originally applied for. That's great. What are you going to be doing? I asked, not remembering if he had ever said anything about it. Hey Derek, do you remember when we were 13 and you kicked Tom's ass? Eric smiled. No, it was funny. Tom bitch slapped Eric and he chased him around the house. When Derek got a hold of Tom, he punched him right in the nose, and they both ended up crying. Getting lost in conversation, everyone at the table looked at Derek, who blushed hard, as if he were the only one in the room. Turning to my left, I took a step back mentally and tried to see how they saw him. Kind. Handsome. Steady. He almost felt like home. He took on all the beautiful words that grew from the beautiful flowers in his chest. I realized that if I were made of butterflies who had nothing but broken wings, being next to this man was enough for me. Looking down at my hands, I almost wanted to get away from him as fast as possible. I knew hurting him would never be my intention, but as far as I knew, my parents never grew back together after they had slipped apart. Everything about their love had remained broken, covered in ash, and swept under the rug, never to be talked about or mentioned. A small part of me felt like if I tried hard enough, I could catch myself before I slipped down the path my mother had. If I were anything like her, I was only meant to destroy things, people. In the beginning, she only let us believe she was one thing and that nothing could change the path she was going down. But in the end, the very end, after she had lost everything, she finally looked over at us, for what felt like the first time, and apologized with tears in her eyes. Maybe I could grow that moment in my mind, I thought. The last few years of her life, all she wanted was love. Almost feeling like a pipe dream, it was fleeting smoke. This man was the kind of stability I wanted. I'd accidentally stumbled across him and slowly realized the flowers at the flower bed were beautiful to begin with, but were really something else every time he came to sit next to me. Then it hit me, he was the man I saw wearing a baseball cap and plaid shirt almost a year ago. I felt that I had recognized him, but I guess I had to wait for this exact moment to remember where. You're here, I thought, looking over at him as if it were for the first time. I'm happy you're here.